Welcome to Living Mirrors with Dr. James Cook. My guest this week is Rob from the YouTube channel Adeptus Psychonautica. Rob's channel explores different aspects of psychedelic culture, from reviewing ayahuasca retreats to encouraging best practices and responsible use in the community. Today we talk about the effects of psychedelics with a particular focus on DMT and ayahuasca, and the risks and dangers of irresponsible psychedelic use. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Okay, I'm here with Rob from Adeptus Psychonautica. Rob, thanks for coming on the podcast.
It's a pleasure, James. It's always wonderful to get a chance to talk to you, mate. So thanks for making the time.
So let's start off with kind of obvious question of how you kind of became interested in psychedelics and you came to be kind of talking about them in public.
Yeah, it's kind of like a kind of a long story, and I'll try and condense it as much as possible. But I mean, I first got into psychedelics very early, in my sort of like late teens, and it was just part of the sort of the scene in Manchester, England. And it was taken sort of recreation. I didn't see much beyond that. But then it was, I started getting into them much more in my 30s, sort of like mid-30s, as a kind of a way of trying to resolve some problems I was having with anxiety, like very severe anxiety that was kind of stopping me from leaving the house. And so, yeah, that kind of, did the usual thing of scouring the internet to find, ways to try and resolve these issues. And that kind of led me to discovering sort of DMT, which then led me to sort of ayahuasca, which then led me down this kind of path of going on sort of shamanic retreats and just really investigating all different aspects of this psychedelic culture. And I guess with what I'm doing on the channel, on my channel, is really just it just changes from month to month, to be honest. It's got this central core of psychedelics, but it started off as I started the channel to kind of review different retreat centers. And then that kind of grew into sort of talking a little bit about the experiences of these different substances. And then that talked a bit into kind of more of a kind of social commentary on the psychedelics subculture in general. So and then I've kind of more recently kind of tried to branch out a bit more into kind of more creative filmmaking around this kind of psychedelic scope. So I'm really just feeling it out as I go along. But it's this core, I guess if I was going to describe what it is I do, how I think it is the journey of like a relatively ordinary person, just going through this psychedelic culture and just using it as a kind of a way of bit of creative expression and sort of working through ideas in my head. I use the channel as a way to kind of think out loud and sort of process things as I'm going. So it's really kind of a kind of video notepad for just my experience really for the last couple of years.
Right. And so with did you say you first tried DMT and then ayahuasca? Is that the sequence?
Yeah. So it was vaporized DMT was a kind of was that transition point between the sort of the recreational things I'd done in my youth and then realizing, oh wow, there's actually something else going on here beyond this kind of recreational use, which I had no idea was there. Because that DMT experience is just so stronger and so much more vivid than the sort of things that were happening sort of just out around in Manchester. That it was this very typical sort of story you hear of someone just having their eyes completely open, like, oh wow, I never knew this was here, and that was, and because it was such a powerful experience, that's what made me want to explore it more in something that would give you more sort of time within that space, which is kind of what led me to ayahuasca. But I think even though I move through different cycles with these things, I think they're all kind of like very valuable tools in the box, and I move between them all, going backwards and forwards. So I'm having a bit of a sort of DMT renaissance at the moment after going through a period where I didn't touch it for a couple of years because it was I just went through a phase where I kind of preferred the slower, if more slightly torturous phase of ayahuasca. And so now, I'm kind of, I don't know, it's just DMT's kind of come back into my peripheral vision at the moment.
And did you find the DMT experience to be therapeutic in any way? Like when you said it felt kind of different to the recreational use, was it just this like, what the hell is this? This is so big as an experience, or did it also have like a therapeutic dimension?
did, but not one that I think you can consciously control, and I'll have to try and pass that out a bit. So I think the thing with DMT for me, my anxiety levels plummeted just in a positive way. So it resolved a lot of the anxiety that I just had day to day. Didn't completely fix it, so I'm not trying to promote it as some kind of miracle cure. But a lot of my anxiety was coming around sort of a fairly irrational fear of death, and perhaps not irrational actually, because it was because I had epilepsy, and there was a kind of a vicious cycle going of me having a seizure, which would then give me panic. I would have panic around having the seizure, and so I just became convinced I was going to die. And after trying DMT and experiencing what I could only describe as sort of heaven, and I'm coming from a completely non-religious, completely unprimed for this, but just having the experience of the divine and this experience of sort of oneness. And I think I was quite fortunate, or perhaps unfortunate, that in one of my very early DMT experiences, I did have this kind of non-dual experience. And so my anxiety level just plummeted, and that just seemed to come for free. Because I wasn't consciously trying to guide myself in that direction. I wasn't sort of even going in with that strong an intention. We were still very much in the experimental phase with it, just trying it out and trying to get the technique right and stuff. But yeah, it just seemed to very quickly resolve that anxiety. And so then I kind of recognized I needed, because it was such a kind of like uncontrollable experiences, that's what's led me to ayahuasca, because I wanted to try and have a bit more space there, somewhere I could focus on an intention and really get to sort of the root cause of this problem. So there is, I think, a therapeutic aspect to DMT. And I think one of the greatest therapeutic aspects is just that it's awesome. It's just amazingly awesome. And so if you are somebody who's, I think if you're somebody who's really feeling like bummed out or stressed, and like your life is just kind of getting on top of you, and you've forgotten, all that kind of like awe and wonder that we have as a child, just having that experience can really make you go, wow, the world is just amazing. I'd forgotten how amazing this is. And I think that in itself is incredibly therapeutic. Sometimes you just need to know that things are cool, things are awesome, and that there's, that have a bit of hope and sort of to recognize your own kind of sort of nonsense and absurdity. But I think when it comes to that sort of deep intentional healing, I think that's where ayahuasca then comes into the sort of, takes precedence as a much better tool.
Yeah, the idea of it being therapeutic, if you're feeling kind of depressed or anxious, that it is therapeutic to just be confronted by some huge stimulus in that way, I think is actually really grounded in like science, because for a long time electroconvulsive therapy, just running electricity through the brain, has antidepressant effects. Like, we don't really know why, but just the brain's electrical organ, you shock it basically, and I mean it's low current, but like you stimulate it, and then it helps people with their depression. Same with ketamine. Ketamine just activates the main kind of chemical in the brain that processes information, and so it's just like seems to be stimulating it loads, and then you feel less depressed. And it does make sense. Like, I think with depression and anxiety, you're often kind of boxing yourself in a bit, and feeling kind of a bit afraid of the world, and then these experiences just kind of like radically open you up, right, to something much bigger than yourselves, and kind of allow you to reconnect with the world.
Similar with epilepsy itself. I mean, a lot of, when I come around from a seizure, you do have this kind of almost like an afterglow afterwards. It's tempered a little bit usually by the kind of muscular aches and pains that you've endured. But I mean, that's also quite a common thing. People sort of refer to having very sort of euphoric afterglows from coming around from seizures. So yeah, there is definitely something to this. Just right. Overload the brain with stimulus, and yeah, for some people it has a profound effect.
Right, and some people with epilepsy have these kinds of spiritual experiences as well, whereas part of the kind of aura that precedes the epilepsy. Have you ever had anything like that?
No, unfortunately not. For me, it's just a feeling of just utter dread, and again, that's kind of what fed into this anxiety problem I was having. It was very much like the feeling I get before a seizure is very much like that feeling of when you're a little kid, and you just knew you'd done something wrong, and your parents were going to kill you when you got home. That that kind of just, and you've got to you've got to go home because you've got a feeling of dread in your stomach. It's not not a pleasant experience. I mean, I've never had these kind of like divine, because some of the accounts I've read in those situations are really almost sound like a psychedelic.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, people talk about sort of seeing angels and stuff like that, or going into very sort of trance-like states. I think, you know, Ian Curtis, who was a lead singer of Joy Division, he used to sort of, you know, sort of try and drive himself into a seizure on stage with the sort of flashing lights and get some sort of inspiration from that. So, yeah, for me, it's always been something to avoid. It's just not pleasant at all.
And have the psychedelics helped with the epilepsy as well as the anxiety?
I know. I wouldn't say that they've not. The situation there hasn't changed. It's just that it's helped in that I'm less anxious, so having less seizures.
Right.
But I mean, if I'm, you know, absolutely honest, if you know, my last couple of seizures have been when I've been on retreat. I mean, if we cast our minds back to the beginning of this year, I mean, you and I were supposed to be on a retreat together, and that,
right.
I mean, that would pretty much set the tone for the year. So just for the benefit of the audience, I was flying out to meet James in Spain, and I ended up having a seizure on the plane, and the whole plane had to be emergency landed somewhere in Switzerland, and yeah, and that's happened a couple of times, and it's worse when on long distance flights, because it's the whole sleep cycle thing that really gets messed up. But that one, when we're supposed to be going to ayahuasca Spirit, completely caught me by surprise, because that was just in the middle of the day and wasn't sure what happened there. But yeah, I wouldn't say that it's the psychedelics have strictly helped with the epilepsy, but they've helped me come to terms with the epilepsy. And I think that's one of the things I think it's probably, if we've got time, is worth going into, because there is one of the phrases that gets thrown around a lot with psychedelics is healing. You know, you're going to these things for healing. And then sort of, you know, a lot of the questions that certainly that I receive from the channel is what can be healed? Can you heal cancer? Can you heal, you know, and, you know, I've had some messages from, you know, people who are in very, you know, emotional states because someone they love has got cancer. It's like, is this possible? Okay. And then you have to kind of sort of then pass out, what do you mean by healing? And I the way I sort of come at that is that I think psychedelics are very effective at sort of what I would call like psychological healings. That if you have sort of some kind of trauma or some sort of anxieties or depressions or something, I think this is where psychedelics work really well. And a lot of that can lead to physical symptoms, like it did with me. My anxiety was causing my epilepsy. You know, trauma can cause things like panic attacks and things like that. So in that regard, these things can be miraculous. But then I think it's important to draw that line as to what can actually be healed. And I think another part of it, which probably goes under the radar a bit, is particularly when you do something like an ayahuasca retreat, your diet changes drastically. So a lot of the stuff that perhaps, you know, some of the anxiety and a lot of the sort of the, you know, just symptoms of everyday life that, you know, we're kind of like ingressing into your life and just getting on top of you. You go on one of these retreats where you're just eating pure and you've got nothing to do apart from sort of, you know, eat healthy, sleep, meditate, you know, and then that sort of work out your demons through these psychedelic things. And you come away feeling amazing. And I think that diet part is also a big element of it. But yeah, you know, there is some shenanigans there about what exactly can be healed, because certainly I've come across some fairly wild claims. People, you know, I think perhaps over-promising. So I think, that's why it's one of the reasons I kind of wanted to have a voice in this sort of community, is just because I think, I think we need to sort of, some of the narratives need dialing down a bit. I think it's useful to have some sort of counterpoints to it, and it's one of the things I try and do with my channel.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. That, like, you know, so for me, I had physical things like eczema, asthma, irritable bowel syndrome as a secondary thing to trauma, which went away with the healing of the trauma. And that makes sense. Mm-hmm. You know, you've got like the psychological stuff you were saying, it's kind of just your way of being in the world. If your way of being in the world is fearful and stressed, then you can have physical symptoms. And in the long run, that can lead to things like cancer, you know, through stress. But if you already have advanced cancer, psychedelics aren't going to rewind that, you know, as far as I know. And so I think I think that's a really powerful way of looking at it. I should really thank you again for being the person who led to me ending up at Ayahuasca Spirit Europe with Wheeler and Tamara there, because that was an incredible experience. And it was really directly through, before we connected personally, I was already using your channel, for reviews for ayahuasca retreats and things like that. And so it's already just this incredible resource that's just absolutely essential, because you mentioned the kind of diet and things as being part of the healing process, but the carers, the community you're in, the group you're in on the retreat, all of those things, the shaman you're working with, is so crucial, right, to have a kind of healthy container. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like that was an absolutely essential step that you really helped me make, was to identify the right people.
Oh, glad, mate.
And so I think it's a hugely important role you're playing. And so with these ayahuasca reviews, like, I guess, did you you see that there was, like, when you were trying to find retreats, that there was maybe like I don't want to say gap in the market, because it's not like you're trying to set up a business to make money, but like there was a need, I guess, for kind of clear laying out which retreats are worth going to.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of my plan. It was just something where I thought at first I could do that. I didn't see anybody else necessarily doing that, like just talking about these things as if you would talk about, like, as not to be flippant, but like a holiday resort or something like this. This is good, and this is why it's good, and to separate out the experience, the place itself, and the care and the team from the medicine experience, because you can have an amazing medicine experience at a very poor, kind of retreat, or vice versa. You could spend a fortune on the most luxurious retreats and have a terrible, very weak, perhaps, you just don't connect with medicine at all. So I wanted to put the actual trip experience to one side and just really sort of offer as best as I could an objective opinion of, this center is clean, this one is expensive, this one is, the food is good, this one, the staff were a bit arsey, and it went hand in hand with just that I'd been on a few of these retreats by the time when I decided to do this. And as you do, you walk around with your phone and you're taking all these pictures, you're taking all these videos that you never do anything with on your phone. I thought, well, I've got all this stuff now, I may as well do something with it. And so that just seemed like a natural thing, was to use the pictures I'd taken, talk about things in a way I thought I was suited to do as this kind of everyman thing. I wasn't completely in this, world where I was, seeing myself as a completely spiritual person, throwing myself on the feet of the shaman, and I wasn't a sort of just a sort of coming at it from a purely scientific sort of point of view. I was just coming at it from like a guy who's like, does this work or not? So it did initially start off like that, and that was kind of my intention with the channel at first, was that I would just keep publishing these reviews as I go on my travels around these different centers. And obviously that's just got completely derailed over this last year, because there's just been nowhere to go. Everywhere's been cancelled. There's no, it's tricky to even leave the country. So I had 3 retreats planned this year, and for various reasons, I've not made it to any of them. And most of that, is because they were just cancelled. So how much more of that I'll be able to do is completely up in the air, because who knows when retreats are going to go back to normal. It's, I'm still in touch with guys like Wheeler and Tamara from Ayahuasca Spirit, and they're just constantly having to shuffle their entire schedule back every like 3 months at a time. So it's the whole pandemic thing is going to change, everything socially on the planet anyway. It'll be interesting to see how retreat centers recover from it, because I know some have, I've got a few people who I know out in Peru, and they've gone under. They've just not been able to sort of sustain. Their entire economy is based around an influx of tourists, and so if there's no way of getting into the country, then that's gone. And it's one thing to last out 3 months or 6 months doing that, but we're now going into sort of year 2 of it, or it's been a year anyway. So yeah, we'll have to see. But there's something I wanted to if you backtrack a bit to the retreat thing, because it's something I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and I think one thing I'm working on a video about it at the moment, is that I think there is perhaps a misperception around what it is actually happening on these retreats. And I think you just pinned it down perfectly when, we're talking about sort of the diet and the care and stuff like that. Because I think it's very easy to look at one of these retreats and say, like, oh, you are getting 4 cups of drugs. You're paying, like, whatever it costs, like say it's $1,000 or whatever, to go away for a week, and you get 4 cups of drugs in return. And that's not it at all. Like, I can make 4 cups of drugs here in my kitchen. That's not why I go to a retreat. I go to it for precisely what you just mentioned. I want that care system around that framework where you can sort of really work on these things, because everything else is just done for you. It's, there is a sort of a psychedelic tradition to sort of guide you through it. There are people there to sort of, help you work through it as you're going through this, what can be quite an ordeal of a process. Your meals are all made for you, your kind of bed's made for you. Everything that you need is done for you. And it just gives you that space to do it. And that is, so much more than the 4 cups of drugs. And it sort of baffles me sometimes that people don't see that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, I was really surprised by how, at Ayahuasca Spirit, there were these group shares where you would, I think it was every day, you'd sit in a circle and you'd just kind of chat about, your experiences. And for me, like that was a really crucial thing. So at that point, I'd gone through a lot of psychedelic kind of healing process by myself. But when a lot of us, we're dealing with kind of interpersonal, like for me, it was pretty standard early life kind of feeling certain ways about, how I've been treated and stuff. And then if you're dealing with that all in your mind, you can only take it to a certain extent. But then if you tell your story and then people hear you and go, oh man, that sounds like it was really hard. Like that can be a huge moment. And I mean, for me, I made a video about my experience there. And that was actually a really crucial moment in my own personal journey of kind of healing, was to realize, because a lot of the time this stuff is tied up with kind of this like guilt and shame and all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And when you stand in front of people and you say, I had this vision where this happened and that made me feel this way, and people just listen and you feel heard, like you can't put a price on that. I think that's something there isn't much, Western medicine doesn't, I guess in therapy it does, but in those kind of communal settings, it doesn't really have a way of offering that. And I think that's just a really powerful experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's that thing of like, if I went into work on Thursday when I'm back into work and kind of opened up in that way, or even if I was out with my friends in a bar and opened up in that way to that, then I just don't think we know how to deal with it as a culture. But by having this space where you can do it, and I've been in those kind of group share situations where they said, Rob, do you want to share something? And I sat up and I was completely fine. And then as I started talking, I just burst out crying. Right. I had no idea it was there, that I just needed to have this kind of emotional outpouring. And I felt so much better as well for getting it out, and it just completely took me by surprise. And it really sort of came flooding out. So yeah, there is, I think, so much more within this retreat space, which I think is worth exploring. And I think part of the challenge around sort of retreats is that, I mean, first of all, there is this cost barrier to them, which not everyone can afford. Right. But then there's also people sort of, again, get very hung up on this sort of like, that it's going to be sort of very traditional or very sort of woo-woo. And I think that there's a place in someone's life for both these things. You can do the traditional and sort of get the benefit of it without necessarily sort of, diving headfirst into it. And that's one of the reasons why I liked sort of Wheeler and Tamara and Ayahuasca Spirit so much, is that you can sort of import this traditional framework without it being stuffed down your throat and without them sort of beating you over the head with sort of Mother Ayahuasca or all this stuff. But yeah, I think there's great value in these retreat settings, and I've really felt the absence of that this year, because for the last 5 years or something, I've been away on at least one retreat a year, and just this year I've just seen them all evaporate around me, and And in this year, where it's been the most stressful of all years, then I was like, God, I could just really do like 2 weeks just away in the jungle, just no phone, just, is there anywhere I can get to where I can just turn off the noise of 2020? And yeah, I mean, hopefully something will come up in this year, I should say now.
Yeah.
But I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, I think also the that thing you mentioned, the kind of cathartic emotional release that happens in the group share situation. Yeah, it's not like we're saying that we need to be in this mode all the time and that everyone should be walking around constantly bursting into tears if they need to. There are times and places for things, and I think that's what's really powerful about approaching psychedelics in a non-recreational way as well. If like once a year someone's like, I'm going to spend 6 hours, I'm going to take some mushrooms, and if I feel emotions, I'm going to feel them and I'm going to let them out. That's like, I think most people can go through their lives not realizing they never really have that release. And it can just be half an hour in a group share, in a therapy session, in a psychedelic experience. And it can be transformative just to drop that emotion, have that emotional release. So yeah, I think that it's not that when you're in the pub with your friends that you need to, we need to have a culture where we're constantly kind of loving all the time. But yeah, I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, and I think the thing around that is that it's I could do psychedelics here at home, but having those kind of cues and that kind of space, and you don't necessarily kind of even realize that there is a space being held as you sit in these circles or it's in a maloka somewhere in the jungle. But I don't think I could do that on my own. I mean, it sounds so simple that it's almost preposterous, but it's and I like to think I'm reasonably intelligent, but I don't just have the kind of I couldn't just put those steps in place for myself just to like, okay, Rob, just sit there, have a think about it, and then have a good cry. It just doesn't work like that. You need the kind of the psychic prodding somehow to get it out of you.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, for me, I think the mushroom, like psychedelics, can often just be the psychic prod I need, but everyone's different. And so it's good to have, as you said at the start, it's good to have all these different tools in your toolkit. And as I said, I'm definitely not saying that therefore you don't need the community setting. So I think that's really powerful. But so with you've said your first experience was, that kind of moved it from recreational to something else. This more intentional use was with DMT. And then did you try, so then you wanted to kind of slow down the experience, and ayahuasca, is this like slow release version of DMT for anyone who doesn't know.
Yeah.
And did you try pharmahuasca first? This kind of, I guess, like pharmaceutically constructed version of ayahuasca?
No, we actually did ayahuasca first. So we found a retreat in Switzerland, which is where I live. And so, yeah, we found somewhere we could get to without doing too much traveling. And so we did that, and it wasn't a brilliant retreat, which again tied into my kind of part of my motivation to do these retreat reviews. It was not well organized at all. But the medicine experience, though, I saw there was some potential in that. So I kind of recognized, okay, I need to find a better retreat, but there is something here worth exploring. And I think we did a couple more retreats locally, and it's, again, still it was, something was happening, but not quite, the extravagant, shenanigans of what's associated with ayahuasca, but still there's some potential there. And then I was kind of coming around to the idea like, okay, perhaps I need to just go and do this in its native setting. I need to go and do it in Peru. And it was just before I went to Peru, I thought, well, before I do that, I thought I'd try pharmahuasca. So I did it pharmahuasca, I think 3 times before I committed to going to Peru. And yeah, I had a quite powerful, pleasant experience with it. And I think one of the things that came to me during that pharmahuasca experience, I went in very, very cautious, because at that time I was very deep into absorbing all the kind of like traditional stuff. I was like, please don't punish me for taking this kind of shortcut. Please don't, But yeah, I had some really good experiences with pharmahuasca, and that kind of stamped the passport then to say, yeah, go to Peru and find out what this is like in its traditional setting. And then I would say when I then went to Peru and had, this was my first experience with Wheeler, And yeah, his ayahuasca was just so much stronger than anything I'd had before, that I was, yeah, just completely stunned. I mean, out of the 4 ceremonies, I got to the 3rd one, and I just could not face the 4th ceremony, because I was just had such a powerful experience the night before. I was just shaken to my core, and in a very positive way, but I was really, it gave me a lot to stew on.
Right. And so just to clarify for anyone who's not familiar with this, so you have DMT is the psychedelic, very much like psilocybin or LSD, and then in ayahuasca you have one DMT containing plant and one plant that contains chemicals that inhibit monoamine oxidase, which is something that digests DMT so it can be orally active, right? Because if you just eat DMT, nothing will happen, because the monoamine oxidase breaks it down. And then pharmahuasca, you're taking the pure DMT chemical, but with some more of those kinds of chemicals, right? So in this case, was it Syrian rue tea? Is that what you used for the pharmahuasca?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that there is, so yeah, with pharmahuasca, it was Syrian rue tea and freebase DMT, whereas with ayahuasca, it's the ayahuasca vine, and chacruna leaves contain the DMT. And I was surprised at the difference between those 2 experiences. You'd expect, because I at the time I was very skeptical. I was thinking, substances is substances. It's all just going to be the same thing, and it's not. There is some differences, but I guess you could also attribute some of that just to the cultural setting of what's happening in this shamanic setting, because when you're on one of these experiences, just the type of music you're listening to can have so much affect how the experience plays out. But it did seem, it was very apparent to me that when I was in the jungle setting, all this very typical Shipibo imagery, this tribal sort of Peruvian imagery, was there where before it had not been there. Is it something to do with the alkaloids in the ayahuasca, in the sort of very traditional ayahuasca? Is it something to do with the shamanic setting? Is it a combination? Don't know, but it's amazing.
Yeah, there's definitely what's known as the entourage effect. So I guess we're brought up to kind of think in quite a reductionist way, like you said, like the chemical's the chemical. And so, I mean, if you take something like THC, the thing in marijuana that makes it psychoactive, cannabis smokers report that the ratio of CBD, which by itself isn't psychoactive, but CBD with THC really changes the effects. And so similarly with mushrooms, people are interested in whether psilocybin alone is the same as, whether you get some entourage effect from all these other chemicals that aren't psychoactive by themselves. And with ayahuasca, the harmaline and all these other alkaloids that allow the DMT to be orally active, they are by themselves psychoactive. So you do have some weird synergies going on. And so, yeah, but you're absolutely right as well. The context of the ceremony will make a big difference. It's kind of fascinating. And I think we're really taking baby steps at the moment. We're at the start of trying to understand these really complex effects of these kinds of potions, I guess, which seems to be something people had a better knowledge of in traditional cultures, the less kind of reductionist mindset than what we have. With these 3 experiences, I guess I'm interested in, would you be able to, I mean, this is a big ask, but would you be able to kind of describe a DMT trip to people who aren't familiar with it? And then we can kind of talk about pharma and ayahuasca and the differences.
Oh, well, I mean, I've just recently done a video trying to do this, and it's I mean, first of all, they just vary incredibly between them. But if we're talking about, say, DMT as in like a vaporized DMT trip, I think, I would say that they go into one of 3 categories. So category 1 is what I just kind of recently referred to as just like cosmic absurdity. It's just, and that makes it sound like I'm being, again, kind of like flippant or dismissive, but it's not. I think this is still an incredibly powerful, awe-inspiring experience, but it's just completely bizarre. It's just, bizarre in a way that cannot be put into words. So I've tried to use sort of, I tend to see like a lot of very flashing sort of imagery, like sort of all like hieroglyphics. There's some sort of something there which appears to be some kind of language, some kind of something which just seems fundamentally true. And I see this a lot across my experiences. So, but it's accompanied by just things beyond comprehension. So that's kind of what I call like this kind of cosmic absurdity trip. Then there's what I call like the sort of the mystical experience, where you sort of, and these experiences can cross over. You can have one which goes into the other, or even both happening at the same time, which is, again, gets even weirder. But one where you're kind of feeling like something, sacred is happening, and you start going into this very kind of fluffy, almost religious sort of terminology, because there's just no other way of describing it. You kind of feel like you're in the presence of the divine. It's something, all these kind of ancestral paths that's becoming available, but you're still sort of feeling very much like you in the presence of these things. And then I think that's kind of the other aspect of a DMT trip is something where it's very kind of cosmic. I've had a lot of trips where there's a kind of like a very sci-fi cosmic galaxy spanning, you are a comet traversing the universe kind of experiences. And then I'd say a very, very, perhaps, very niche experiences, and this kind of non-dual experience, which I have had a few times on DMT. So, but the main thing with DMT though is just it's so short lasting, and it's just so powerful. And again, all these things can be all happening in parallel all at the same time, that you do have this kind of jump back from it, like, just what the hell just happened? Kind of it's shocking in its weirdness. And that's different to the sort of ayahuasca or pharmahuasca experience, which tend to have a much slower, kind of more structured, more space sort of feel to them, where you feel that, I'm here now, and you get a feel for it. And sometimes it's pleasant, or sometimes it can be unpleasant or very challenging, but you feel like you're moving through it, and it comes up much slower, and you come down much slower. Whereas, the vaped DMT experience is almost like instant up, overwhelmingly up even, and then there's the sort of the come down is a little bit easier. And something I just done recently, which I hadn't done before, was changa, which is another form of kind of smoked DMT, and this is where you have the MAOI herb infused with DMT. So you're having a kind of like a smokable mini ayahuasca, in that it lasts longer than the pure vaped DMT, and you're getting all some of these MAOI substances as well. And so I've been trying that out over the last couple of days, and that feels more like the tail end of the DMT experience without the breakthrough. So you still get all the kind of the stuff, the kind of the afterglowy, shifting, pulsing, a bit of the geometry stuff, but you don't get this kind of ordeal kind of esque breakthrough and blasted off through the galaxy. I've been doing a little bit of experimenting there, and I'm probably going to do a bit more experiments with that. So it's it's probably the tool of choice at the moment.
And so you use that term breakthrough, which is, I guess what I kind of casually call the DMT experience would more precisely, as you said, be the kind of vaporized DMT breakthrough experience, I guess you could say, right? Mm-hmm. Where most people might say smoking, but actually you're vaporizing it rather than smoking it, as you say. And then you're trying to get a high dose in a very quick period. You're just trying to elevate your DMT levels in your brain to quite a high level. And then you have this, I think, to me, I guess perhaps the defining characteristic of a breakthrough experience is a complete loss of connection to this experience of the world, and it's fully replaced with another reality. Is that that's the kind of core feature of breakthrough?
Yeah, that's precisely the sort of the way I would describe it. I think it's the point at which the inputs you are receiving via your five normal senses just no longer apply. Something else is going on directly in consciousness, or it actually, it feels very much like a sixth sense has come online. And I think this is where you get all this, all the mysticism comes in around sort of like pineal glands and third eyes and all this kind of thing. But it does feel like something else has turned on. And, I guess you could sort of think of it, it's just happening purely in consciousness. So, whatever's going on in the real world, be it sort of, audio or visual, you could sat there with your eyes completely open, and that other thing is still happening, and you can't turn away from it, you can't close your eyes from it, you can't put your fingers in your ears. It's just being like beamed directly into your brain in kind of real time. And it is a completely fully featured alternate reality. There is nothing sloppy or fuzzy or low resolution about it. It is hyper resolution. It's, the phrase that people use, are more real than real. And so, and you almost to the point where you can cease to be aware of that you are actually a human being who has taken the substance. That you have to sort of come back into your body sometimes and remember that. It's like, oh my God, it's coming back to me now. I took a substance. So I just think an experience which is just almost impossible to sort of put into any kind of words. But I think that description of it just being, beyond your existing framework of senses is just the only way to describe it, really. And it just seems so odd. And the other, really, it seems so odd. It makes perfect sense when you're there, but it's just utterly bananas.
Yeah, I think you used the word shenanigans earlier, which really resonates with me, because I'd say for me it was very much like, if you think of, in neuroscience, we often think about our experience of the world like now as being kind of like a constructed reality. It's like a kind of controlled hallucination that I'm kind of generating from within my brain, all these images to help me interact with the world. And it's like if you imagine that there's like a screensaver or some wacky video game that's been put in as like another module in your brain, and it's like, oh yeah, you can turn on that, and suddenly you're in this absolutely perfectly constructed world, and it's just playing out. And yeah, it's, to me, the first two categories you mentioned of kind of the kind of the wackiness and the divine or mystical. The first breakthrough experience I had was very much like you're yanked out of this reality, and there are all these entities, and they're fundamentally, the message is that the whole point of existence is it's one joke. It's the most hilarious, ridiculous joke in the world, and the only thing to do is to laugh relentlessly for all of infinity, and to keep, it's just some stupid pun like existence. And but then at the end of it, after all these wacky entities were kind of sending me this message, I was effectively kind of laid at the feet of God, and then just in a state of complete I don't know how I'm supposed to put that into words, but so yeah, it can have both of those things, those aspects to it. And it's just literally the most unexpected thing in the world, as far as I'm concerned. I could not have anticipated that was possible. And when you tell people about it, they're like, I think people think, I almost get the impression people think you must be kind of feeble-minded if you were like, oh, you bought into your hallucinations and they seemed kind of real, and as if, as you said, some kind of vague thing. But it's just, it just slaps you around the head with this unbelievable experience.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing, and I think that someone who's not had that experience would sort of, can maybe be a little bit skeptical of, because you would expect that you take some kind of substance and that would kind of like impair you in some way, so that if the typical thing you see on TV is, oh, the walls are melting, so something is wrong with me, that it's things have gone fuzzy, or I think there's something there but there's really not. And it's not that it is so perfectly organized in its absurdity, and it makes so much sense. And even though when describing we're using these kind of words like absurd, I actually find it incredibly calming and beautiful. The kind of the cosmic joke is
right.
It's very kind of resetting of I always get these very strong vibes of that. It's okay. Just don't worry about it. It's just look how bonkers this thing is. What are you going to do about it? Look, all this craziness is just happening everywhere, all over the universe, and you're a part of it, and it's just fine. It's just fine, dude. Just don't worry about it. And I think that was one of the reasons it helped me overcome my anxiety. I found that sort of message. And again, it was a very clear message that I got from this sort of I interpret it now as an audio message, but really it's kind of something almost like you're remembering it in real time. But the phrase was given to me like, just do not worry about it. You're going to come in through that door and you're going to go out through that door, and it's fine. And just that sentence just kind of cured my panic attacks, because it was like, yeah, well, of course it is. It's just, this, I before I was in a different state of being, and now I am in this state of being as this human being. And afterwards it will be something else. And maybe that something else will be complete oblivion and annihilation, but that's the way it goes, and it's fine. Don't, what are you going to do about it? And so, yeah, it's so, I think that's the thing that's very hard to grasp when we've never done DMT, just how much it makes sense in that moment. And even to this, when we talk all this kind of symbology and hieroglyphic language, you understand it perfectly in that moment. You read it like a book, and I always have this thought of, I will never forget this. This knowledge will stay with me forever. And then 5 minutes later, it's like you can't even remember the concept of what it is you were seeing.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point, the idea that the joke definitely isn't on you when you're definitely in on the joke of the universe, in these experiences. And, for me, that first experience, I remember going from feeling very kind of shocked and wide-eyed and like, wait, what's happening? As these are just in my face, like laughing and telepathically communicating with me and being like, welcome home, like we missed you. And I'm just like, wait, what? Like 10 seconds, like 30 seconds ago, I was just and at the same time, I'm thinking this is ridiculous. And I'm also thinking, how did I forget this is the structure of reality, that we come from here and we go into this would be some kind of simulation. That's how it feels. And so you're simultaneously like, how do I forget? I'm never going to forget this. As you say, like it feels so familiar and so right. And then I had actually completely forgotten this until you mentioned that. But I remember now going from feeling kind of like wide-eyed and shocked with these entities, almost like kind of slapping me on the back and like laughing along, and just kind of, and eventually I basically became one of them. I just started kind of getting into the joke, and it was just like, do you see how silly it is? And then eventually I'm just like, in my head in this experience, laughing like a maniac as well. So I think that's definitely, and that could be very therapeutic to feel. It gets you out of your evolutionary programmed concern with your own egotistical survival for this period that you exist as this mammal, right? That you're just like, reality's serious, and we've got to take it very seriously, and it's all about survival. And so it can be very therapeutic, I guess, to be taken out of that.
Yeah. I mean, I just that sort of, as an adult man in my sort of 40s, and just being able to come out of one of those experiences and just laugh like I've not done since I was a child. Sometimes, especially over Christmases, something happens and you see my kids just start laughing, and they're rolling around on the floor like kids do, and you forget a lot of that as you go through life. You forget that sort of, like I said, there's that sense of awe and wonder that you really have as a kid, and to be reminded of it is just such a gift. And so, even though we talk about these experiences, it's like this 5-minute blast of just complete absurdity. There is something, I think, very magical to that DMT experience. And that's kind of what made me want to revisit it recently. But there's kind of the weird counterpoint to that is, you can get to the point where like the prospect of doing it is just overwhelmingly, I don't know if terrifying is the right word, but there seems to be a very weird disconnect between the amazing experience is on the other side of this pipe or vaporizer or whatever you're going to do, and the feeling that you get before it is the number of times that I've set out to have a DMT experience and just completely chickened out, even knowing that I will likely be like gushing about it 15 minutes later. And that's a funny, I don't know how is this our kind of like ego rebelling against us here? Because that's really what we're doing, is kind of obliterating our rational filters for 10 minutes or whatever. Yeah. I mean, have you got like a sort of the neuroscience take on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right there. I think part of it's to do with the how fast it comes on. And so you think of if you're doing something like ayahuasca, suddenly you're having a very vivid hallucination And there's a instinctive like this is a bit overwhelming. Should I push it away and try and get up and move around? And then you remind yourself, no, surrender to it. This is why I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this like negotiation going on with two parts of yourself.
Yeah.
The part of you that knows to surrender and wants to move beyond rational thought, but then that instinct of survival. But with the DMT experience, I think you just don't have time to have that negotiation. You're throwing aside a whole, part of yourself, your ego, your the parts of you that are kind of to do with self-protection. And it's like a skydive. It's like to me, it was like a skydive through the universe, and there's no way that's not going to be overwhelming. And yeah, you're right. It was an unbelievably positive experience, but I would actually describe it as mildly traumatic because the next time I went to do it, my hands were shaking in a way that signaled to me a physiological stress response. Like I was, and I felt it psychologically as well. It took took several months for that to really, to fully go away and feel like the thought of approaching it wouldn't make me feel a bit scared. And I've actually seen this in people writing about DMT. It seems to be a common experience, this almost like an aura of fear as you approach it. And even Terence McKenna, who's, one of the kind of the bard of talking about DMT, there was a talk he gave, I think, where he said, like minutes before you do it, even before you've got out the pipe and stuff, you're caught in this vortex of it, like it's coming, and psychologically you're in it, and it has this huge weight. So I do think it's something I'm intrigued by, the therapeutic effect for you, because for me, it was actually probably anti-therapeutic for me, like in the sense that it was an amazing experience, but it was unsettling and produced a kind of stress response. So I definitely think it's probably not for everyone. Compared to, like the slow release stuff, I think lots of people could probably work with. But yeah, I'm intrigued to see in this kind of psychedelic renaissance where the intense DMT breakthrough experience, like what role that ends up playing, I guess, like if it's a therapeutic one or not.
Yeah, I think that's something we're going to have to kind of map out there, and it's strange because with something like the experiences around like DMT I've described, again for some people it can be just what they need. You can imagine someone who's like really hitting sort of rock bottom in like depression or anxiety or something, and it really, that could be the thing which turns it around. But just as equally, it could also be the thing that allows them to discover a new level of trauma to this thing. There's things can always get worse. So it's very. I always try and shy away from giving any kind of like medical or sort of like shamanic advice or anything, because I'm just not qualified to do that. If someone says to me, should I do this? It's like I can't say. That's a responsibility you have to take on. And I've used this phrase a lot of you are rolling the dice here. So I think the sooner that the sort of the science side of things can catch up and maybe provide a more steady framework of who is right for which experience and who should be doing these things, I think that would get us in a better place, because it does feel like a bit of a dice roll for people. And I've certainly been on retreats where I've seen people could have a completely negative effect to these things. And some of it I think is a negative effect to just the power of the experience, and some of it is that it's very hard to know what you're actually getting yourself in for. So it's one thing to, if you've had like sort of problems, a traumatic childhood or something like that, and you sort of you realize you're going into this experience to try and handle that, but still that doesn't quite prepare you for that moment where it just lands on your face just in one go, and all this kind of trauma to deal with in this sort of just instantly. It can be overwhelming for people. So yeah, it's I think that's something that the whole psychedelic renaissance is going to have to work out, and I think it's going that way with all the different sort of trials and stuff that's going on. So yeah, hopefully there'll be something more sort of concrete there than just people on the internet.
Yeah, I think I guess the problem is for a lot of mental health issues, especially with trauma, the issue is you're kind of trapped in your fear. And then if you think of psychedelics as something to be feared, they need a very, very healthy you know, they need to be treated with a lot of respect. But they really can be the way out of these issues of fear. And so I think a very slow, gradual approach, you know, is probably the way. You know, if someone takes a microdose and then maybe they try something like MDMA, where they're not going to be overwhelmed by any visual effects, you know, and then you take a small dose of something like mushrooms, there's a path, right? I think people can test the waters, go slowly, make sure they remain grounded. And then, you know, something like the DMT breakthrough experience that's always going to be diving off of a high board or, you know, skydiving. But I guess there are people, you know, if I went skydiving tomorrow versus someone who's done rock climbing and they've got used to how it feels to engage with their like adrenaline system and stress it out a bit, there's a difference there, you know. And so I think we'll hopefully learn, the best way to kind of map this space. And then when it comes to remaining grounded, I feel like you've spoken a lot about one of the main risks, I think, with psychedelics is if you don't remain grounded, if you do them excessively without trying to kind of come back and feel, like, I don't know a better word than grounded, then you can get people who become kind of delusional and have kind of sense of grandiosity. And I think you've been doing a really valuable contribution to the community by calling this kind of thing out. You know, it can be kind of uncomfortable because you don't want to be, you know, the mainstream world can be a bit excessively skeptical and fear mongering, but you manage to do that without, you know, you're not coming from that place. You're clearly coming from a place of wanting people to access these things and have positive experiences, but not falling into the trap of thinking we have to just be relentlessly positive all the time. We can still hold people accountable.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's definitely an element of this kind of toxic positivity within the psychedelic culture, and I think part of it carries across from the kind of the hippie-esque sort of movement. And it is a little bit tricky to do those kind of things where you kind of saying something which is going to be, you know, is going to be perceived as negative at some point, because that's not a pleasant sort of feeling, and you sort of, you know, you want to try and be sort of tactful and sort of be compassionate, and certainly not feeding to my own kind of ego of just dogpiling on somebody because they're saying something stupid, and it's very easy for me to go into that mode, and this is one of the things I try and work on for myself, like not to be that person. But that said, some of these things are just kind of so out there and so absurd and so unchallenged that I feel sometimes you do need to be a bit of a kind of a sledgehammer. And I think one way to do that is to sort of come at these from a kind of like a bit of a comical angle, because, you know, I think this is one of the great strengths of comedy, is to sort of point at the absurd and say, like, are we actually, you know, is this what we're saying here? So I always try and kind of, you know, do things in a way to kind of like point out the absurdity, but also try and put like a sort of a rational argument towards it. And then that opens up a whole different kind of words, because then you're a rationalist, you're a materialist, you're only interested in the material things, and I try and put as much reverence into the transcendent side of these experiences, and, you know, and show that I think there is something truly amazing going on, but I think it's amazing enough without, you know, saying that, you know, it unlocks latent sort of psychic superpowers and stuff. And, you know, and if that happens, then fine, I'll be, you know, if someone starts beaming sort of telepathy into my head instead of picking up the phone, then I'm fine with that. But I think, you know, there's just so much like people want to believe this stuff, and I was also a little bit taken back by how much that kind of guru culture then can sort of seep in with the people who make these sort of, you know, sometimes very outlandish claims about what is possible with these things, and it just goes completely unchecked because that's my guru, so I'm not, you know, we'll not touch that. And I've seen a sort of another aspect to that, which is sort of unsettled me a little bit, which is the blending of the psychedelic culture has crept more into the mainstream, which I think is a good thing. And, you know, and with you know, 15 years ago, not many people were talking about ayahuasca, and now sort of it's become like a known word. You see it here in TV shows and stuff like that. And so it's kind of, people are sort of doing it as part of this kind of, almost like a kind of a nootropic sort of thing, as a way to sort of, think clearer and sort of become part of that movement. So you're getting people like bankers and hedge fund managers are also, going dipping into this kind of ayahuasca, which again, I've not a problem with that. But then there's something I think a little bit weird happening as that's kind of creeping out. And I've seen a lot of these kind of like entrepreneur types, also internet entrepreneur types who've had these kind of ayahuasca experiences. And then, and I mean, I use the term entrepreneur extremely loosely, because these are people just, like peddling sort of like the online courses of hey, sign up for my course and I'll teach you how to, manage stocks, or turn 5,000 into 5 million, or buy my cryptocurrency things. And, people who are making money by selling a dream almost. And that's a weird collision of, this kind of entrepreneurial spirit combined with what I'm kind of seeing as like a kind of drive-through spirituality, where someone's kind of like, going on a retreat to have that passport stamped, and then they have an inroad to that, into that sort of those psychedelic credentials. And I mean, the one that kind of jumped to mind here is a very good example is Brian Rose from London Real, who's, I think he's going on some very just grifting people for, like, constantly asking for donations for all these various projects which never seem to play out, but yet still seems to, big up his kind of his psychedelic credentials. So I think it's important there to sort of, I felt it was something I needed to do, right, where I said, just let's look at this in a rational way, and whether it's like, some shaman who wants to sort of squirt water up people's noses as he's, while they're in psychedelic trances, to sort of people claiming to have God powers, or to people who I just think are just kind of grifting the community. I don't see a lot of that going on, so it's kind of like a role I've kind of adopted. But I mean, it's almost like something I don't particularly enjoy doing, but I feel like it's sort of it needs doing almost.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely does need doing. It's almost like, with psychedelics, that I guess they're part of, spirituality in general and stuff. You can think of them as like being inspiration, and you can come up with new ideas, and it opens your horizons. But then I think, skepticism and rationality and thinking about the world and being self-critical, all of these things are really powerful tools to then trim back whatever it is you've created. And that's I think that's a wonderful way to live life, instead of just being a skeptic who's like, who won't go near any of this stuff, and you're kind of trapped in your skepticism, or someone who's fanatical and just has no interest in any kind of skepticism at all. And then unfortunately, we have a culture where it kind of becomes polarized. And then if you're interested in using skepticism and rationality, you're assumed to be one of the people who's, as you said, you just dismissed as like, you have no, you're out here just to dismantle everything. So I think it's important to do, exactly what you're doing, and bring both of those things to the table, coming from this, like, this positive place. Because it's no mystery, it's no secret that gurus exist and that abuse has happened in the past, and so it's really important. And I think you have this, what could be sometimes surprising, this kind of paradoxical ego inflation after psychedelics, which you can have these experiences of losing your sense of self, feeling humbled, but then, as you said, this kind of drive-through spirituality where it's like, I've had that once, so now I'll file that away as a thing I've had, and now I'm special, and I don't really have to cultivate it or integrate it, and then you can get these kinds of messiah complexes, and you can behave in ways that are not consistent with the insights you've had. And I think it's always important to remember that the ego, the rational mind, is incredibly tricky. It doesn't just give up. It doesn't have one ego dissolution experience and then just go away. I remember in early kind of meditation and in early psychedelic experiences, kind of watching my talking mind, my rational mind, and then it would kind of keep popping up again and again. And I would kind of wait for it to go away. And then there'd be a voice in my head being like, oh, thank God that guy's gone. You know, like, thank God the irrational mind's gone. Then I'd be like, wait a minute, you're the rational mind. You're the voice in my head. And it's this constant kind of sneaking back in. And I think, yeah, so I think that can absolutely play out. And if we don't hold each other accountable, yeah, it's not that we don't want to have a repeat of, we don't want people to have any reason to tear this stuff down, right, and ban it again if it's done irresponsibly.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this is what the great thing is about your channel is, James, because I mean, you know, you've had these psychedelic experiences, and you've also got this, you know, this science background, and you've also got your own sort of theory on what is happening within these experiences. You're living mirror theories, but you're not stood there, you know, saying to people, this is how it is. This is absolutely, I know, you don't know, but I know, and this is how it is. And then with all that, then you're still going talking to all these people with their own theories. You know, like I loved, you know, some of the conversations that you've had this year with, like, you know, Donald Hoffman, and, you know, these are, you know, each one of these theories is like, you know, with your own, they're so, you know, well baked ideas. But again, no one's sort of planting the flag as though this is it, and if you don't believe this, you're completely stupid. I think this is the difference I see between someone like yourself and some of these people I'm talking about, is there's the real sort of, I think that the people who really are integrating this work and these experiences there's a level of humility to it, and the people who seem to me completely unintegrating, or there's just no effort of integrating the experiences, this, like, you know, you use the phrase ego inflation, it just goes through the roof. There's an arrogance and a kind of repulsive amount of ego to it. And then for someone like that to then have the nerve that if you know, challenge them in the slightest way on what they're saying, you know, the first thing they will come back is it will, you know, there's almost a playbook for it. First of all, yeah, you're a materialist, you're closed-minded. You know, what you think you're enlightened, you think you're more enlightened than this person. And then the other one, which is coming out of the woodwork a lot recently, is, you know, well, you've just not done enough of this particular thing. If, you know, you need to go and do a big high dose of, you know, whatever substance it is, and then you'll get it. And I was like, oh, is this what we've come down to, some kind of pissing contest of who's done the most, you know, of this substance? And yeah, I think it's that's kind of it's funny that you know, people will accuse you of being closed-minded, because I see that as very closed-minded. It's very blind, follow the leader, unquestioning thing, and I think that needs dismantling. I think people, we need to really try and up the kind of, you know, the amount of critical thinking in the psychedelic community. And it's not that, you know, everything, you know, needs to be ultra skeptical and ultra dismissive. Because I mean the phrase I always use when, you know, people ask me, like, what do I think is going on? Is like, I kind of like, you know, I don't know. I don't particularly care. All I can tell you that is it's kind of amazing. And my experience, my subjective experience of these things is that, yeah, something fantastic was happening. And beyond that, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't matter. I don't think it's whatever explanation, you know, gets certified by, you know, whatever peer review paper is, like, fine. I'm fine with it. If you tell me that this is, you know, interdimensional aliens, I'm good with that. If you tell me it's just drugs acting on my brain, I'm good with that. It's still some of the most significant experiences of my life, and I can't unexperience them, so it doesn't really matter to me. And it kind of baffles me a bit that some people get so hung up on that. Like, there has to be, you know, I've seen people argue so passionately in favor of it just must be transdimensional aliens. How could it not be? It's not really, I mean, I can think of a few ways it might not be, but it could be. I mean, does it matter? You know, it's so, yeah. I think I'd like to see a bit more humility within the psychedelic culture, and just a little bit of a bit more reflection, a bit more interpretation, a bit more of this integration thing. I think it's a topic that I feel very sort of dearly about, because I think that's the only way that we get value out of these things. Because if you just, if I took these experiences at face value, that I'm driving a camper van around the universe right now, then it's you've got to do some kind of work around getting something back from that. Otherwise, it's just we're just getting high and having wacky experiences, and which is fine.
But then we're back to Manchester before this. I think I completely agree with what you said, and the idea of I'm very interested in what the answer it turns out to be with these things. But you're right that people get kind of, so the way that I feel about something like the DMT experience is, if you saw the sun for the first time, say we lived in a cave and you came out and you saw the sun, it would be just this astounding thing. And you would want to say to everyone, hey, come out, look, there's this thing, and plants grow when it shines, and it's the most insane thing. And then you would want to start to come up with stories. Oh, maybe it's a god, maybe we need to pray to it, or maybe it's maybe you'd get quite close and you'd say oh, it's like a flame in the sky. But then after a lot of science, a lot of constructing explanations of the world, you come up with this story, okay, it's combusting like hydrogen, and hydrogen is this, and you need to kind of understand the chemistry, and then you go, oh, okay, that's what it is. And it's not, the answer isn't really what you're looking for. It doesn't, the description of what it is in the end isn't, I don't think it's ever going to be, so it might, with the DMT experience with meeting entities, it might be, some kind of very complex, thing that involves understanding evolution and sociology and psychology and perception, and then eventually, if someone could sit down and go through a lecture course where they're taught all those different disciplines, and then they're said, so this is how the trick is done, you're probably just going to come away going, oh, okay, well, I'm still good, with the sun, I'm still going to plant my plants. If you're a hunter-gatherer, well, not hunter-gatherer, if you're early human doing agriculture, I'm still going to plant my plants. I'm still going to be in awe of it. I think that's a really healthy way to remain grounded.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like biology. I don't think there's any amount of biology knowledge which you're just going to sit there and say, oh, right, I now understand love. I now understand perfectly why, whether it's, maybe it's not biology, maybe, some other discipline going on, but there's no amount of kind of text or exercises that kind of will explain to me why I feel this way about these people. And I think that's how I sort of look at these psychedelic experiences. It's just pure meaning, and you have to get your own kind of meaning from that. And my meaning is not necessarily going to be the same as somebody else's meaning. So this is why I think it's kind of important not to sort of necessarily beat somebody else over the head and say, no, it absolutely is aliens, because aliens might not mean anything else, to somebody. But yeah, I think it's the important bit. I think it is just doing that bit of work, as in what does this mean to me? Okay, so I saw these entities and they gave me this session. What does that mean? And it might be something that comes very easy, like I sort of described with the DMT experience. And what I usually find is that with something like, say, ayahuasca, that does take a lot more unpacking to get something from it, but it's usually, it takes so much longer because there's a lot there, more there to unpack. I think DMT sort of like gives it you, here you go, there's the lesson in it's like saying 4K 3D TV, whereas ayahuasca can be something to stew on for weeks or months even, past the event.
Yeah, actually, I think to go back to the ego inflation point, I feel like I've noticed recently that one substance in particular seems to be associated with this, and it's 5-MeO-DMT, the frog venom chemical that's found typically in this frog venom. And I've been reflecting on that because I suddenly just noticed there's a handful of people who are the main culprits of this overly confident, quite kind of mean-spirited, overly kind of, not coming from a kind of humble place, you could say. And I wonder if it's so with 5-MeO, you have this very similar to DMT, to normal DMT. These two things get confused a lot. People sometimes think DMT is an abbreviation of 5-MeO. I think so. They're very different substances, but it has a similar kind of almost breakthrough effect where you vaporize it, you have this very rapid takeoff, and then you feel, as you described it, what's called a non-dual experience, where there's just existence. There's no separation between you and existence. It's just feels like eternal beingness. And then you come down and you've had this kind of like an enlightenment experience, right? And my instinct is, it's because it's so fast. It's the thing we spoke about earlier, how the ego, your sense of identity, your narrative about yourself is pushed aside. This experience, the ego doesn't really have the experience. The experience is so big, it just kind of, it's there. And then the ego comes back, and then it kind of, it's completely not integrated. The ego just takes that as a story and then says, well, now I'm going to walk off. I've not done any work on myself. I've not developed in any way, really. I'm now going to say I've had that. I'll add that to my list of things that makes me great as a person. That's my current speculation. Do you have any? Does that feel valid to you?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I mean, one is just that the 5-MeO experience is a very kind of like almost like a next level sort of psychedelic in a different kind of way. I say it does seem like a fast track to this non-dual experience, but it's not as visual as sort of like the DMT experience we described earlier. So it's a very different sort of experience. And I think the other thing around that is that it doesn't really have any kind of sort of tradition or framework around it. So, and it's also very readily available, and not so much in the frog venom form. The frog venom's a little bit sort of tricky to get hold of, but in terms of just being able to go online and buy it, it's fairly readily available and is illegal in a lot of places. So you don't have to jump through the same kind of hoops to be able to get hold of it. So, and I think that those things, that the power of the experience, the availability of it, and just what, the kind of the scenario you described of how you try and rationalize the experience. I think it is a kind of a bit of a almost like a perfect storm, really, because if you have somebody who has access to this stuff, and they are just kind of like doing it, on their own, they could be sort of a very sort of loner type or whatever. Then these delusions of grandeur can appear full font, and there's nothing there to challenge with. You've not got that kind of group share structure we talked about earlier. There's no sort of traditional framework. You might not even have sort of family or friends around you, and it's a very solo experience. So this is not something like, say, mushrooms, which you could do in a sort of in a group setting. This is very, I would say, even more of an ordeal than an NDMT. So, and I think with it, I think there is something to that 5-MeO experience, and it's funny that you bring it up, because it is something I've had my eye on recently. I've been watching a few documentaries about it. I have had an experience with 5-MeO with the Bufo, with the frog venom version, and I with having seen a lot of this ego inflation going on, it's kind of a expression like, is there's something fundamentally in this that drives people nuts? Is there, is it one of those things where you are just playing with fire here? Perhaps a fire that's, some people can get away with, but if you are susceptible to that sort of thing, then it can just send you very far over the edge. Because a lot of these kind of people I'm referring to in some of the videos, they are completely self-assured in what I would say is their delusional thinking. It's completely baked to them. It's fully formed in their head, and there's no other way around it. And so, which makes it kind of impenetrable. Even when you start pointing out some of the flaws in the thinking, it's that you can just you think, well, that's a great paradox. That's there's ways out of it for them. But yeah, so I was kind of thinking, okay, do I want to? I certainly want to have a better understanding of this play, of this, what's going on around 5-MeO. Which kind of made me think, okay, well, maybe I need to sort of revisit that experience. So that is probably something I'm going to be doing within the next couple of weeks. And yeah, I'll sort of, I guess I'll I'll look to people like you to sort of keep my feet on the ground if I start talking completely inflated roof. I mean, I've got my wife and kids around me, so they there's nothing that keeps you grounded quite like being told to make the tea. But yeah, it's an interesting and very very, very strange experience. I've just watched a really good documentary on it called I think it's called Bufo Alvarius Reloaded, and it's a kind of a sequel to another documentary around 5-MeO, which was called I think was it called the Hidden Secret or something like that. And yeah, it's a very good documentary. Got 3 guys really sort of breaking down the sort of the pros and the cons of this experience, and I got very good in pointing out what's, it's not for everyone, the potential sort of, dangers within it out. And I think probably more than any other substance, 5-MeO can really pull the rug from under people. That's what I see in a lot of the sort of the people who have these kind of ego inflation reactions, or just very sort of strange reactions to it. But again, there's no traditions. But this is one where we're kind of like inventing our own traditions around it. It really is a kind of a Wild West substance. So yeah, I'm not sure how exactly I feel about that one, but I think it's something I am curious about enough to revisit.
Yeah, and when it comes to the kind of overconfidence of the, or lack of humility of the people kind of talking about this stuff, it's tricky, because I think a lot of the pushback maybe you got as well is that these people do offer value. They do offer genuine insights as well, and interesting thoughts alongside kind of overblown claims. And the thing with the non-dual insight, as I think about it in its core, it is kind of different to everything else, in that it's like it's so simple. It's kind of just saying like reality exists, everything exists, and you're part of it, and it's just a kind of a knowing of that in its most basic sense, like beyond words. And so it is unlike everything else in that it's not a story, it's not a narrative, it's like, and so it can't really be false. So it is true. There is this weird, I think this is the thing they pick up on, and they think, I've got the secret, I know it's true. And so that's all like all true. But then when you start to, I think the mistake people make is, this is why meditation is valuable, because in the meditative state, it wordlessly. But then when you come back and you start to put words on it, and you say, only consciousness exists, and it's God, and you can relate to it, and I'm God. And that's when every word you say, you're getting further and further away from that actual insight. And that's where you can start to kind of, and then, as you say, once people start to claim that they can, manipulate the physical world with their mind, that's when you get into the realms of like, well, if you can, then you should probably just demonstrate it, because as no one has ever done.
I think a lot of the problems with it is this linguistic game, because you can backtrack to the experience, and you can start agreeing with people. So someone says, I've had this non-dual experience, and I was one with the universe, and you can say, yeah, okay, I felt that too, I'm with you. And you can say, and that that everything in the universe must be like, it is all one, and we that thing is God. And you can say, well, sure, we could say it's God. It does. There is this feeling of the sacred, the divine. Sure, I can call it God. And so that, and then step 3, so I am God. And yeah, okay, and you can work through this. But then by the time you get to steps 7 or 8, it really starts getting out there. But because you can agree with the first like 6 or 7 steps, then by the time you get to the step 7 or 8, wherever, like, and everything is imagined. I am God, and I am manifesting you here, James. You are just a figment of my imagination. Everything that is happening to me is just by my own willpower. So I'm just not going to try in life anymore. And by that point, there's just no breaks on that framework, because the kind of points 1 through 5 just seem so solid, and you've got the experience to back it up. That it's that little kind of jumping into the wacky is a jump too far for some people. And again, I think a lot of the pushback that I get to these things is that people will instantly come back and say, you don't understand what God is. And it's like, I think I do. And I don't think it matters particularly. And I don't have I have never tried to argue that somebody is or isn't God. If you want to call that state God, go for it. I've used that language in my sort of trip reports. I met God. I was one with God. That's what it feels like. But then to do that final spin in it of, I am the chosen one. I am the sort of Messiah. I am here to teach you something, and all you need to do is sign up for this course, and you can be enlightened this way. That's it gets ugly, and then and usually the people who feel they are qualified to start teaching are just the least qualified. These are people who are probably having a hard time, like I said, controlling their ego, and really what they should be doing is dialing it down and really sort of integrating the experiences rather than going through this kind of evangelistic phase, which we've all been through. And it's something that's why I try and put this rational frame around it, because hopefully you can sort of talk them down and dial it down. Like, actually, dude, if you just come back to here, you'll see you don't necessarily need to be, Moses on the mountain, sort of waving the Ten Commandments around. It's just.
I think it comes back to the kind of balance thing earlier of like the usefulness of skepticism in its right place, to kind of trim back these ideas. Because if you as you said, like if people go down this train and they think, well, this is it, I should try and live in this enlightened state, and I should try and be just purely on this kind of this trip into the absolute, but they forget that they still exist as a kind of relative person in the world, and you still have responsibilities. And both of those, there's this thing in Buddhism called the doctrine of two truths, which I think is really valuable. Just that you don't just abandon this. You don't say this is just an illusion that we're separate, and so I'm just going to stop talking to you right now. I'm going to get up and leave. You can still, and that's the grounding to me. You get in touch with these kind of absolute states, and then you come back to this kind of grounded relative way of being, and not remembering that we shouldn't take this way of being too seriously, because there is another way that's more profound and more true. And so I think it just comes back to grounding. And when people are in it, I think it can be this real slippery slope, but from the outside it becomes very simple. Like for you and me, the people that we've seen like this, you use the word, I think you said repulsive, in the way that they're kind of carrying themselves before, which resonated with me. And that a lot of them, it just takes 2 seconds to set off alarms of being like, oh, like we would not be friends. Like we would not sit and have a conversation, and I would not feel like I didn't, like enjoying my conversation with you right now. It's quite easy. If you trust your intuition, it's quite easy to tell these people. But I think a lot of the time it can be hard to a lot of people haven't learned to trust their intuition, I guess, and feel out whether they can trust people like that. But so it's really important, I think, that you're offering your thoughts on this stuff.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of the things weirdly with those kind of people is that by their sort of mannerisms and by the outlandish what I said, they're actually selecting an audience who is extremely susceptible to this kind of stuff. So it really is this kind of like double whammy effect, and then they will attract this very kind of like passionate fan base. And it's I've had some very strange messages of people sort of just the usual sort of internet sort of nonsense. But it's I worry that some people can get very very lost in these experiences, and then that will then sort of backfire on the entire sort of culture as a whole, and we end up back in the kind of like the Timothy Leary-esque sort of things, because that is where a lot of these sort of guru types go. It usually inevitably ends up with, I will give you large amounts of substances, and you will be just like me. You'll be awakened just like me, and that's, I think, pretty terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to maybe end on something a bit lighter. The last couple episodes I did were over Christmas were to do with Amanita muscaria, because of the kind of links to Christmas. And that's something that I know you've been exploring over the last year. And it's kind of interesting because in the kind of literature on the links between kind of psychoactive substances and religion, the fly agaric or Amanita muscaria mushroom comes up a lot. But I've never tried it myself, but it doesn't seem, it's not like DMT, it seems, right? It doesn't give you visions of entities, it seems, that readily. So I guess I'm interested in what the experience is like, and if you're surprised that people claim it might have a link to kind of inspiring religion.
Yeah, I don't see that at all. I think, when you have a psilocybin experience or ayahuasca experience, and I mean, I know you've talked to the author of the Immortality Key, which is just a great book, so I absolutely loved it. And you can very much get this connection between the experience and kind of like the religious sort of mystical experience. It just seems, it becomes very obvious. I did not get that at all with Amanita muscaria. So I think when there's a lot of stuff in the psychedelic community, when people sort of refer to like soma or something, this is probably Amanita muscaria. It was a very pleasant experience, and I would certainly do it again. But I didn't get that same kind of feel. It's just not got that kind of tryptamine otherworldliness to, the secrets of the universe are unlocked sort of thing. It felt medicinal. It felt, I'd say more like kind of sedative. There was a kind of a drunkenness to it. It was kind of fun, very dreamy, but not. I don't think that could lead to one of these mystical experiences. And granted, I'm very new in this Amanita muscaria space, and I'm going to do some further exploration there. But I mean, you only need to have like quite a smallish amount of something like psilocybin or DMT to sort of get the depth of the landscape there. And I don't think Amanita muscaria has got that same depth. And apparently, I did what I've been told was quite a high dose of it. And I certainly, like I say, I had a very pleasant experience with it. But I don't think so. I can't see the kind of religious connections that I would expect from something like psilocybin mushrooms. But yet it is there in all this kind of iconic ancient sort of artwork. So maybe there's something there. Maybe there's something in the preparation that I'm sort of not aware of. Maybe it was mixed with some other stuff. I know this was talked about in Brian's book, The Immortality Key, of that a lot of these potions were mixtures of lots of different things. So yeah, maybe that was one of the key ingredients, because it is very dreamlike, and that's funny to use that word, because you kind of think of something like psilocybin as being dreamlike, but I think of psilocybin or like DMT as being like hyper reality. Whereas dreams are kind of fuzzy, shifting, sort of, not the same kind of thing. And so yeah, I personally don't think it is. I don't think that's a bridge between psychedelics and religion.
Yeah, I mean, the point you made about like it being one component in a potion, we made that point earlier on in this conversation about lots of indigenous cultures kind of working with synergistic mixes of stuff rather than reductionistic, separating things out. So I think it's definitely a possibility. And also in a similar vein, we're used to, again, this kind of reductionist way of thinking where it's like, I take the chemical and then I have the trip and I don't need to prepare. It's just, it does the job. But I feel like if, so in like Siberian shamanism, where they do use this mushroom and they do say that, in some of these traditions that it helps them connect with the spirits of the ancestors. Perhaps if you are, you're living close to nature and you're living through these kind of mythologies that connect you to the world around you, and you're the shaman who's already been selected because you have some propensity for engaging with these states, which, we know the trip isn't in the chemical, the trip's in the brain, the chemical just unlocks it. Mm-hmm. So I can imagine like the mushroom in that context just being a kind of, just bumps you over the edge into this kind of, into something that you might be already kind of tuned into as a way of being. But yeah, I feel like it has to be something like that, because it doesn't seem, it's, once you try something like DMT, it seems like, why wasn't this the thing that founded religion? If you told me we found definitive proof that early humans managed to somehow produce something like ayahuasca and they were drinking it, I would go, oh, that makes complete sense. They were literally meeting spirits, and then they come back and they say, well, they have the experience of meeting spirits, and then they say, apparently spirits exist and apparently there's a spirit world, because it feels very literally like that, right?
Yeah, I mean that was the kind of the hypothesis in the Immortality Key, wasn't it? That they were brewing some sort of LSD infused. It was coming from ergo, wasn't it? Some kind of beer. And it was funny because I was in Greece for my family vacation, just completely unrelated. I was just there with the family because it's one of the few places we could get to on vacation in October. And so we were doing all the tourist things of traveling around Athens and seeing all these temples, and they're magnificent. And the thought was coming to me like, what makes a culture do this? You see the same thing if you go to pyramids or Machu Picchu, whatever. It takes some doing. You could be doing anything else. Some king, you could be, building a new palace or waging war or whatever. What makes you do this? Just build some colossal monument to something sacred, because these are no small feats of engineering or just labor even. And so then when you sort of there's this connection made between a culture which uses psychedelic, and when you have these kind of one of these experiences. And one of the first things that came to me, one of my earliest DMT experiences, was just Aztec pyramids. I was just seeing Aztec pyramids all over the place, and Aztec sort of Inca writing, and I was again not primed for that particularly. So yeah, I can see how that there is a culture that is using these kind of potions or something to get into these states, and then what they're trying to do is recreate what they are seeing in the thing. That the thing they are building physically is to try and get closer to the thing that they've seen sort of spiritual or psychedelically, and that vision has to be so powerful to motivate them to do that. And I think that's where Amanita muscaria falls short. It's not got the kick that would make me go and start building pyramids or start building temples up on them, carting marble from 5 miles away to make some sort of temple to Athena or something. I just don't see it. So that's why I was kind of so interested in Brian's book, because that makes a lot of sense to me, that there would be some kind of tryptamine based, something that's going to send you to this hyper reality, which you're then going to build this entire culture of, the greater mysteries. I mean, even when you sort of, when you've had a psychedelic experience and someone says like the greater mysteries, you just get it instantly. Oh, I know what they're talking about. Of course, it is the mysteries of the universe. And I think this how this whole culture is built around it, and they have this kind of like year-long sort of indoctrination to get to this point where you can deal with the mysteries. I think ties into this whole idea of the psychedelic renaissance. We've got psychedelics exploding onto kind of into our world scene at the moment. And we don't have this kind of Peruvian traditional framework, and we don't have this kind of long lost Greek, the greater mysteries framework, but it's kind of happening anyway. And I think maybe this is something we perhaps need to try and get back or come up with somehow, because I think it's one thing to have, say like a psilocybin sort of center where you can go and do it under clinical conditions. I think that's a brilliant thing, and I'm glad that exists. But I think, I don't know whether that fully covers what I think we can only really describe as the sort of the spiritual aspect to it, or the sort of the preparation aspect to it. It doesn't necessarily give you this kind of integration framework to it. It just means you have that experience in a very, very sort of safe way. And maybe you could sort of attack some amount of like therapy around it, like after. But I don't know if that's necessarily gives you the same thing as what I gather from these kind of like these greater mysteries, of where you've spent a year building up to what you are aware is going to be the most monumentous experience of your life, and then you have it, and then it kind of feels like that would make sense then. Whereas I think, we just don't have that at all at the moment. So I think we need to catch up a bit. So it's one of the reasons I really got my teeth into this book, and I loved the interview that you did with Brian there. And I think, what was your sort of take on all that? Did you find it plausible?
Yeah, I mean, I Brian's book was excellent. So it's Brian Rescue, The Immortality Key, and yeah, I find his stuff extremely plausible. I think the idea that early humans were using um, naturally occurring psychedelics like mushrooms or perhaps other things like ergot in potions seems very, very plausible to me. It seems almost impossible that they wouldn't have had some knowledge of these mushrooms that had profoundly
Yeah.
psychoactive effects. And it's a well known theory, a very respected theory in the kind of origins of cave art and religion, that psychedelics may have been involved. So I think that's very, very plausible, and that, yeah, everything adds up in the way Brian presents it. That these Greek ceremonies were kind of a throwback to that, like kind of saying, let's remember these traditions. He kind of points
Hmm.
out that like it's all to do with kind of agriculture and brewing beer, and it's not, the Greeks are, and you don't write it down or talk about it, but the Greeks are known for like wine and writing. So it seems like it's a very different thing, and beer brewing is much more ancient than wine making. And so, yeah, I think the idea that it was carried through, and that these Greek ceremonies may have had some influence on Christianity, and that's what the wine is, and Jesus' wine. That I think he presents extremely well, and is very plausible. Um, but yeah, a lot of what you said actually is a bunch of things we've said in this conversation that reflect on something I've been thinking about and working on a lot recently, which is that you mentioned my consciousness theory earlier, and in that the kind of core idea is that consciousness is fundamentally to do with emotion, because it's to do with survival. It's to do with kind of feeling your way out in the world and existing moment to moment. So I've been playing around with this idea that when someone has a kind of DMT experience and they become obsessed with building a new cosmology, building a new picture of reality, whether it's that we're in a simulation, we're a biotechnological experiment by aliens, God exists and communicates with us through DMT, like all of these different worldviews, people get very passionate. It triggers this passionate need to kind of figure out the structure of reality. And my instinct is that that's to do with this like emotional um, role that consciousness plays. You build up a sense of reality to make you feel safe and help you navigate the world. Then you basically have your mind do the most astonishing things it can do, and then you try to incorporate that into your picture of the world. And so I feel like when we see people become convinced of the existence of aliens because of their DMT experiences, which, to be fair, can be astonishingly alien-like. Like I had no interest in aliens and UFOs, and then suddenly I'm being abducted and I'm on a table with these things, seemingly doing experiments on me. And I'm like, oh, apparently that's a thing my brain can do, or I didn't know that was in there. So anyway, but yeah, so I think the what we're seeing is almost like a that spark that's led to humans being different to other animals, to having religion and art and yeah, these kind of religious cosmological pictures of the world. I think we're seeing people individually have that again through psychedelics. And I think psychedelics may have been, altered states may have been the thing that sparked it in early humans. And so it gives me this I think it's exciting that that's a positive way of looking at people who get obsessed with the kind of figuring out, well, what is the nature of reality that explains this. It's kind of like we're really getting in touch with something very fundamental of what it means to be human. But at the same time, the risk of that is that it becomes hard to stand outside of it. And if you're in it and you're building that worldview, it's fulfilling an emotional role and making you feel good in the world in a certain way, feel that reality is actually really exciting because aliens are involved, or your life has meaning because there's a God and there's an afterlife, like whatever it is that resonates with the individual. It becomes hard to step outside of yourself and see your own psychological biases, because consciousness, you're in it and you're building it. It feels you're feeling your way through in a way that feels good. So that's the trick, I think, is to try and take both of those perspectives. Like for someone like me as well, like I'm not just doing the science thing and standing outside and saying it has to be 100% the existing paradigm. It has to be just the brain, and I'm trying to not do that, whilst not getting lost and saying, hey, like when I'm in the DMT trip, it feels like that this isn't the real world, that's the real world, and it's some weird joke, and it feels that way. So you have to kind of have those two yeah, have those two sides. The feeling part, there's part of me, you could say there's part of me that knows the DMT experience is real, but that isn't the part of me you would call James or my rational mind, or, the part that has the ability to say, well, actually it feels real, but it's probably not. But that feeling part is in there. So it's, I think we're rediscovering something really fundamental about being human, but there are some kind of risks that go along with that, I guess.
Yeah, it's a funny balance in that, because on the one hand, there's kind of like where I kind of lean towards is this kind of like, I guess it's kind of like Buddhist sort of worldview of, it's, you just kind of just accept it. This is your human experience, and again, does it really matter if it's aliens? Just have the best possible human experience that you can have, and don't get too obsessive over these things, because it can often not lead to something productive. But then on the other hand, there is something just intrinsically fun and awesome about this kind of curiosity. It's like just the joy of the mystery and the weirdness of, like, thinking about these aliens, or some of these concepts that just come, which just hadn't occurred to you pre-psychedelics. They're so fun to explore that it's almost kind of like tragic just to say to them, oh, well, none of it matters, to just go and, be a human being. So I think that that's the kind of the balance that we have to sort of find in that. I am so grateful that there are people like yourself doing the science and sort of trying to sort of figure it out. But then again, on the other hand, it's like it's not going to change anything about my personal experience. And I think that's the kind of the healthy level that we've got to get to, of explore whatever concepts in whatever way, in a way that is productive, whether it's productive in that it's fun, or whether it's productive in that it's expanding our knowledge in some way. But at the end of the day, just it's you cannot live sort of completely over there, no more than you can live completely in this like non-dual experience. You are a human being. You have got to get the best out of this. And it kind of comes into conflict a little bit with one of the kind of the key sort of tropes in psychedelics, is that we are the universe experiencing itself as matter. And I think that's a beautiful statement. It's something I think we can all sort of relate to. But if that's true, even if you go into the full-on sort of like God speak, or sort of non-dual speak, and that we are all God, and that the only reason that we are experiencing individuality is because God wanted to know and understand what it was like to be separate, or to understand what it was like to be matter, then that's our role. That's our job. Get on with it. You're going to be God anyway. It's going to, you've already been God. You're going to go back to God. So to get lost in trying to transplant that into this human experience, just for the kind of for the sake of, I think he's kind of missing the point somewhat. I think we should dial into these experiences and use them and have fun with them and expand our our understanding of things, and use it to sort of just get through a lot of the the stuff that our modern life dumps on us. But we don't get lost in it. I think that's the thing. And I think, whether it's people who are getting lost in conspiracy theories, like, the aliens are fun, but if you are sort of checking every corner for aliens, then I think you're probably, taking it a little bit too far. And same with the God stuff. I think I can understand it must be very, that feeling of oneness is very reassuring. That feeling of being bathed in just the love of the cosmos is amazing. But then again, to sort of take it too far is kind of can be destructive. So I think that's kind of where we're at as a culture. And I think the more conversations we can have around these things honestly and openly, then the better chance we have of kind of balancing those scales.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke with Joseph Goldstein, who's one of the people who brought mindfulness meditation to the West, and he basically made exactly the same point, where he was saying that he said metaphysics as skillful means, which kind of means, like, your picture of reality should basically be in the service of you, like, living a good life, feeling in, I guess he would talk about in terms of psychological freedom and freedom from suffering. And I think that's really wise. If you're caught in your, like, I have to get the story I'm telling myself has to be the right one of the structure of reality, you probably
Yeah.
would do well just to look and see, well, where's all this anxiety and fear or like unease coming from? Can I feel a bit more grounded and be like, yeah, it's fun to think about this stuff, but not everything hangs on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just sort of always try and sort of encourage people just be sort of grounded, have fun with these concepts. But if it sort of means everything to you that the earth is flat, then maybe it's time to chill out a little.
Yeah. This has been great, Rob. I've really, really enjoyed this. Where would you send people if they want to look into your work more? I guess your YouTube channel is an obvious place.
I'd say the YouTube is where I say it's my primary sort of like think out loud pad. I do have a few other sort of social media channels, but I would say YouTube is definitely a place. So yeah, if anyone just searches for Adeptus Psychonautica on YouTube, I'm sure should be able to find me.
Great. And thanks again, Rob. This has been really fun.
Yeah, I love it, James. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely.